Giant monsters are very cool. But why are they very cool? Is it perhaps the sense of scale? Perhaps it's their destructive potential? Their blockbuster guarantees? Or maybe it's that the stories of heroes defeating giant monsters inspires hope in all of us, that our individual insurmountable odds may in fact be somewhat mountable. Regardless of the psychoanalytical reasoning behind why you particularly like giant monsters, at the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to presentation and spectacle. So without further ado, here are some awesome giant monsters and how to use each one in a way that will really make it feel giant. A group of adventurers are on their way through the ancient woods in search of Philroy Levinson's house of unbridled power. And unfortunately, they are lost. They've been lost for many days, but luckily, one of them has a gut feeling that, aha, I think this might be the right way. Maybe they rolled really well on a survival check, maybe the dungeon master wants to throw him a bone. Doesn't really matter because after about an hour of travel, they see it. Boom! Philroy Levinson's house in all its glory. Wow. Wonderful. The adventurers quickly start exploring the ancient home, searching for treasures, but all of the gold they find is fake. And all of the food they find tastes like Play-Doh. And all of the magical scrolls they find are nothing but blank canvases. Something is very, very wrong. And it's at that moment that one of the adventurers turns and realizes they are all alone. And that is when the Balhannoth attacks. While technically the smallest of the giant monsters we'll be looking at today, it has a massive area of influence, both physically and mentally. Whenever a creature enters within 1 mile of this thing's lair, it immediately understands exactly what they desire, and that creature, it will start to experience a sensation of being on the right path. It will feel like the closer it gets to the Balhannoth's lair, the closer it is to accomplishing its goal. That, on its own, is a very powerful psychic lore, but it goes further than that, because the Balhannoth can warp physical reality around itself up to an area of 500 feet. It can make that area look like literally anything that it wants. And what it wants is to make that area look like what you want, so you want to go there, so it can eat you. Now, this transformation is not perfect. Books will not have text, the food will be flavorless, so anybody that does make their way into the Balhannoth's lair can figure out that it's not what it seems like it is. The Balhannoth can also become invisible, they can teleport themselves and other creatures around them. Basically, this monster is gaslighting your players, the monster. The house. Gaslight House, the monster. Actually fighting it is not going to be that difficult. This is a squishy little guy. It's slow. It's weak. But you know what's a pretty powerful move? Teleporting someone into a room the size of a closet with no doors or windows lined with adamantine. Because it can just do that. The only real limit on this reality warping is that it takes 10 minutes. So this thing can't be summoning giant claws out of the ground or splitting rooms apart, but it can prep. It can build a space to be and to hold whatever it needs. If it wants a room full of spikes, it can just prep a room full of spikes. But then, yeah, you gotta let the hero squish it at the end because this much gaslighting demands a certain amount of retribution. Now, if the Balhannoth is all vibe and not a lot of meat, this next monster is a whole lot of meat with a very simple vibe. The Remorhaz. When we think of giant monsters, we often think of, well, giants, dragons, maybe a T-Rex. And that's kind of why I love the Remorhaz, because it fills that same role mechanically in the space, but it has such a different vibe. And my goodness, is this a simple monster. It does one thing. It bites, but it bites friggin' hard. Also, it actually kind of does another thing because it has a heated body, so it can exist in the Arctic and burrow through the ice. But that also means that if you touch it, or hit it with something like an axe or a club or whatever, you will actually get burned. If you want to make the Remorhaz, or quite frankly, any monster that's, at the end of the day, just a big mouth, feel really intense, just show the audience what happens when it uses that mouth effectively. As the heroes traverse the Frostmire on their way to the lost tomb of the Undying Lord, the ground below them starts to shake. And then, all at once, the entire wagon in front of them bursts into the air and ignites in fire as the Remorhaz erupts from the ice before turning and burrowing back down into the ground. Let the devastation of the moment sit for a beat. Just enough time for the danger to really settle before the ground shakes again and the Remorhaz bursts out once more, this time looking to the heroes for its next bite. Giving a big, simple monster an opportunity to show the true potential of its big, simple hit is often all you need to make these things feel awesome. What that big hit is against kinda doesn't matter, so long as the audience or the players bear witness to it. But what if you want to go bigger? What if you want your monster to be so big, it's bigger than a scene, it's bigger than a house? What if you want to make a monster that is a true encounter? Let's kick it off under the sea with the Leviathan. Aside from the fact that this is a very big, very beefy boy, the Leviathan can launch literal tidal waves. What do I mean by that? The Leviathan can launch a wave that is 250 feet long, 250 feet high, and up to 50 feet thick. Kaboosh! Any creatures that are huge or smaller that are in the space of the wall, when it hits them, they get hit by a bunch of damage, and if they're not strong enough, they get sucked into the wave as it continues to launch itself forward, leaving behind nothing but devastation. Why devastation, you ask? Well, aside from the fact that there's a bunch of creatures getting caught up in that turbulence, any damage the Leviathan does deals double damage to objects and structures, including tidal wave. Don't just think about this as a wave that sweeps away creatures. This is a wave that sweeps away everything. And it's not even a once-a-day thing. This monster can do this over and over and over again. It has to recharge the feature, but assuming that it's just out at sea, swimming around, it could be launching tidal waves at a city all day. What if the heroes are in a city that's being sieged by a Leviathan, and they have to figure out how to get out, or how to find someone to help them get out, or to steal something before the city is destroyed? Sound effects. Splash, splash. As much fun as it might be to surprise your audience with an explosive moment of devastation, what happens when they can see the devastation coming? What happens when they can watch it literally walking towards them, and they just don't know how to stop it? Well, friendos, let me introduce you to my good old buddy, the Zaratan, aka the big friendly turtle of destruction. In addition to being the cutest little dosh garden guy this side of the elemental planes, the Zaratan can create earth-shaking movement. What does that mean? Well, in short, if it moves at least 10 feet, the Zaratan sends out shock waves through the ground in a 120-foot radius centered on itself. These earthquakes churn the earth, making the whole area difficult terrain. Anybody standing there loses concentration on whatever they're focusing on because they can't keep steady. Any buildings or structures in contact with the ground take a boatload of damage, and if any of those buildings start to collapse, any creatures around those buildings will get covered in rubble. This is a literal mini-game mechanic built into this thing taking steps. And what makes it work so well, considering the fact that this turtle is large enough that there are trees growing out of its back, it moves pretty slowly. A little bit faster than your average person, but much slower than your average horse. So if your heroes are in a city, they could see this monster walking towards them over the horizon like a hill slowly growing, they would have plenty of time to think about and maybe even experiment with different ways of stopping it. You give them something that seems unstoppable, but you plant the seeds so that they may find the ways to stop it. We're gonna do something a little different with this next monster. Imagine the heroes learn of a community that is under siege from some horrific cosmic monster. Anybody that gets too close to it gets severe headaches to the point where they might kinda kaplik. And the few that survive all describe this thing as looking like something completely different. Each one a different horrific nightmare of a monster. And the one adventurer that they've heard about that was able to not only survive getting close to it, but to hit it with a sword, immediately was flung 100 feet away and crashed into a tree. A wizard came by and tried to blast it with a fireball from far away, and you know what it did? It immediately shot a much more powerful fireball back at that wizard. Whatever this thing is, the heroes gotta figure it out and go kill it. That sounds pretty cool and scary, right? Cool. Well, let me tell you a different story. Once upon a time, there was a baby giant. It loved its family, it loved playing with its friends. It was happy. And as it got older, as all giants do, it got bigger. But when its friends stopped growing, it kept growing. Bigger and bigger. Horns started to grow out of its head. Horns that no other giants in its clan seemed to have. And by the time it was in adolescence, it was nearly twice the height of the tallest giant in its whole clan. It found itself uncomfortable around other giants. They seemed to be wary of it. In fact, sometimes giants complained about having headaches when they were too close to it. And as it got older, this distance, this uncomfortable space just grew and grew and grew. Until one day it realized that even though it was surrounded by people, it was utterly alone. So it left. It left to wander the world. And sure, it was big, it was powerful, but it didn't know how to fend for itself. It always had the clan to rely on for food, for shelter. And one day, when it was really hungry, it spotted a human settlement. This is the Gargantua, a giant that towers over others. Standing at an average of 40 feet tall, these horned behemoths may be the children of giants, but they are so alien that they are no longer categorized as giants, but as aberrations, and they are often seen as such by the communities that they try to exist within, leading most to live lives of quiet isolation and lonely solitude. But also, it has a weird aura that forces creatures to see it as a manifestation of their worst fears as it deals massive psychic damage to them. It is so big that its mere flick can launch creatures that are large or smaller up to 100 feet away. And if a spellcaster tries to use magic against it, it can gain access to that magic and reflect the same spell back at them. It can also teleport and incapacitate creatures just by looking at them. I wanted to introduce these monsters in two different ways because I think it's very easy to look at a monster with all of these genuinely frightening features and to make it a monster that is genuinely frightening. But the Gargantua is not an evil monster. It's a sad monster. It's a tragic monster. We've spent most of this video talking about giant beasts and how to turn them into epic encounters and exciting combats. So when your heroes go to meet this monster, they could fight it. They might win. But what if they don't? What if they learn what it is? What if they try to understand? We are so eager to see monsters as monstrous, and they so often present themselves as such. But what if that's not their intention? Maybe it's in their nature to be destructive. Maybe it's only right to put an end to them. But I don't know. The Gargantua may be one of the biggest giants, but the heroes have an opportunity to stand just as tall. There is power to be found in empathy, and there is glory to be won in friendship.